Driving the I-5 corridor from Seattle to Portland in the dead of night is usually a quiet, monotonous gig. It's a straight, 3-hour shot down the interstate, mostly surrounded by towering pine trees and suffocating Pacific Northwest fog. I drive a 2023 electric sedan packed with modern tech, lane assist, automated climate control, and a massive digital dashboard. It's a comfortable ride, which is why I usually get high-rated business travelers. When the ping came through at 1:15 a.m. for a premium ride all the way to Portland, the estimated payout was over $300. It was the kind of fare that makes your whole week, so I accepted it without a second thought. The pickup location was a dimly lit, high-end apartment complex in the upscale Seattle suburb of Bellevue. Waiting under the awning, completely untouched by the drizzling rain, was a man in his mid-30s wearing a charcoal peacoat. He didn't have any luggage. He didn't wave. He just stared blankly at the glowing screen of his smartphone. I pulled up, the silent electric motor of my car coming to a smooth halt, and unlocked the doors. He opened the rear passenger door and slid into the seat diagonally behind me. "Arthur?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He didn't look up from his phone. He just gave a single stiff nod. "All right, Arthur. Looks like we've got a straight shot down to Portland. I've got water bottles in the center console and charger cables if you need them. Should take us about 2.5 hours. Again, no verbal response. He just kept his eyes glued to his device. I shrugged it off. A silent passenger on a long drive is usually a blessing. It means I can just listen to my podcasts and focus on the road. I shifted the car into drive and navigated out of the quiet suburbs, merging onto the glowing, rain-slicked pavement of Interstate 5 South. For the first 45 minutes, everything was perfectly normal. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the wet asphalt and the soft patter of the rain were the only sounds in the cabin. But as we passed the city limits of Tacoma, the streetlights grew sparse and the dense, dark forests of Washington began to swallow the highway. I checked my rearview mirror to see if Arthur had fallen asleep. He hadn't. He was sitting perfectly upright, still staring at his phone. But the light reflecting off his face wasn't the usual soft blue or bright white of a standard smartphone screen. It was a harsh, glowing crimson. I squinted, trying to get a better look at the reflection in the dark glass of the rear window. I could just barely make out the interface of his phone. It looked exactly like the rideshare app. It had the map, the route line, and the little car icon. But the entire color scheme was inverted. The map was black, the route was a glowing, jagged white, and the app interface itself was a deep blood red. And instead of showing a passenger view, the screen was displaying a highly detailed diagnostic wireframe of a car. My car. A cold prickle of unease washed over the back of my neck. I looked back at the road, telling myself I was just tired, seeing things in the glare of the dashboard. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Arthur raise his thumb and slowly swipe downward on his red screen. Clack. The sound was sharp and mechanical. It came from all 4 doors simultaneously. The heavy electronic locks of my sedan had engaged. I frowned, reaching down to my driver's side door panel. I pressed the unlock button. Nothing happened. The little amber light indicating the doors were locked remained stubbornly lit. I pressed it again, harder this time. Dead. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. Arthur's thumb was still hovering over his screen. He tapped a small icon in the corner of his red display. Immediately, the child safety lock indicator illuminated on my digital dashboard, completely disabling the interior door handles in the back. A second later, my window controls went entirely dark. "Hey, Arthur," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, masking the sudden spike of panic in my chest. "I think my car's computer is glitching out. The lock's just jammed." Arthur didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He just stared at his crimson screen, his thumb hovering over a new set of controls. The chilling realization hit me instantly. My car wasn't glitching. He was hacking it. And we were traveling at 70 miles per hour down a pitch-black highway. "Hey, Arthur, did you hear me?" I raised my voice over the hum of the tires, trying to project authority, but my voice wavered. "The locks are jammed. I'm going to pull over at the next exit and reset the battery system." Arthur remained completely still in the back seat, an eerie silhouette bathed in the harsh, blood-red glow of his smartphone screen. He didn't acknowledge me. Instead, his thumb swiped horizontally across his display. Instantly, the automatic climate control system roared to life. The fans kicked onto their maximum setting, but instead of the warm, comfortable air I had set for the rainy drive, a blast of freezing, AC-chilled air violently blasted from every vent in the dashboard. The temperature in the cabin plummeted in seconds. I reached out to dial down the fan speed, but the touchscreen on my center console was completely frozen. The digital numbers showing the interior temperature rapidly dropped from a cozy 70 degrees down to 60, then 50, then LO. "What the hell are you doing back there?" I yelled, the cold air stinging my eyes. I hit the hazard lights button on the dash, intending to pull onto the shoulder of the interstate immediately. The hazard lights didn't engage. I looked up at the rearview mirror. Arthur was still staring down at his phone, but his thumb was now resting on a new slider on the red app interface. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed the slider upward. The radio, which had been turned off for the last hour, suddenly shrieked to life. It didn't play music or a late-night talk show. It blasted a deafening, high-pitched frequency of raw static, so loud it actually vibrated my teeth and made my eardrums throb in agony. I slammed the heel of my hand against the volume knob, trying to kill the power, but the physical dial was useless. The car's computer was completely overriding my manual inputs. I was locked in a freezing, screaming metal cage moving at 70 miles per hour down a pitch-black highway. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized my chest. This wasn't a glitch. This guy had somehow bridged his phone into my electric vehicle's central computer network. I gripped the steering wheel tight and took my foot off the accelerator, preparing to slam on the brakes and force the car onto the rumble strips. I didn't care if it caused a scene or damaged the tires. I just needed the vehicle to stop so I could get out. I pressed my heavy boot down onto the brake pedal. It didn't move. The pedal was completely rigid, as if a solid cinder block had been wedged underneath it. The electronic braking system was locked out. "Stop the car!" I screamed over the deafening static, my eyes wide with pure terror. I pumped the brake pedal frantically, putting my entire body weight into it, but it was like stepping on a slab of concrete. I looked at the digital speedometer. It wasn't dropping. In fact, the numbers were slowly ticking upward. 72, 75, 78. Arthur was accelerating the car from the back seat. I looked over at my central navigation screen. The original GPS route, the safe 3-hour drive straight down I-5 to Portland, flickered violently. The blue line glitched, disappearing for a split second before a new jagged red line materialized on the map. It was rerouting. The new destination wasn't a city or a residential address. It was directing my car to take an upcoming exit that led deep into the dense, unlit logging roads of the Capitol State Forest. The end point of the red line stopped dead in the middle of a massive black shape on the map, an isolated deep-water reservoir. I whipped my head around to look directly at him, abandoning the mirror entirely. "Turn it off. Turn it off right now, or I swear to God I will crash us both." For the first time all night, Arthur looked up from his glowing red screen. The crimson light cast deep, hollow shadows under his eyes. He didn't look scared. He didn't look angry. He just stared at me with a completely blank, dead expression and slowly raised his index finger to his lips in a shh motion. Then he tapped his screen one more time, and my headlights went completely dark. The world outside the windshield vanished into an impenetrable, terrifying black void. Traveling at 80 miles per hour blind on a rain-slicked interstate is a death sentence. The only illumination left in the cabin was the demonic crimson glow emanating from Arthur's phone and the digital speedometer on my dash, which was steadily climbing to 82. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my forearms cramped, my eyes straining into the darkness, praying the road ahead was straight. 2 seconds later, the right side of the car hit the grooved rumble strips on the shoulder. The violent, bone-rattling brrrr of the tires vibrated up my spine. We were drifting off the road. I yanked the steering wheel hard to the left, overcorrecting in my blind panic. The heavy electric vehicle lurched sickeningly, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt as the chassis swayed. I managed to stabilize the car, my heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I looked back at Arthur in the rearview mirror. The violent swerve hadn't fazed him. He was bracing himself against the door panel with one hand, his eyes still glued to his red screen, entirely unbothered by the fact that we were seconds away from a fatal crash. He was waiting for the car to reach the exact GPS coordinates for the reservoir. That's when I realized the horrifying truth. I couldn't outsmart the software. I was driving a 2-ton computer, and he had root access, but software still relies on hardware, and physics still applied to the flesh and blood sitting in my back seat. If I couldn't stop the car digitally, I had to stop him physically. "You want to drive?" I screamed over the deafening, high-pitched static still blasting from the speakers. "Let's drive." I braced my left foot against the dead floorboard, gripped the steering wheel tightly at 9 and 3 o'clock, and violently jerked it back and forth. I threw the heavy sedan into a brutal high-speed slalom across the empty lanes of the pitch-black interstate. The G-forces were immediate and punishing. The car violently whipped left, then right, the suspension groaning under the massive weight of the battery pack. Arthur, in his arrogant focus on the screen, hadn't put his seatbelt on. The first sharp swerve threw him hard against the rear driver's side door. The second, even more violent jerk to the right launched him across the leather bench. He hit the opposite window with a sickening thud. The sudden impact broke his concentration, and the glowing red smartphone flew from his grip, bouncing off the center console and dropping down into the dark footwell of the back seat. Instantly, the deafening static from the radio cut out, leaving only the roar of the rain and the wind. But the car didn't slow down. The dashboard was still locked out. The digital speedometer read 86 mph. The autopilot was still engaged, executing its final command, taking the exit ramp that was rapidly approaching on the right, leading deep into the Capitol State Forest. Arthur scrambled frantically on the floorboard, desperate to retrieve the phone in the dark. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my thumb against my seatbelt release, unclicked it, and took my right arm off the steering wheel. I twisted my torso, throwing half my body backward over the center console, blindly reaching down into the dark footwell to grab the device before he could. My fingers brushed the smooth glass of the screen just as Arthur's hand clamped down on my wrist. His grip wasn't just strong, it felt like a steel vise crushing my bones. He snarled, a vicious, animalistic sound that completely shattered his calm, tech-savvy persona. He yanked my arm hard, trying to pull me over the console, his other hand blindly feeling for the phone. I looked up through the windshield. The massive, reflective green sign for the forest exit was flashing past us in the rain. The car autonomously jerked the steering wheel under my left hand, taking the sharp off-ramp at 85 miles per hour in absolute darkness. We were heading straight into the trees. The tires screamed against the wet pavement as the heavy electric vehicle took the sharp, unlit curve of the off-ramp entirely too fast. Arthur's grip on my wrist tightened, his fingernails digging into my skin as he desperately scrambled for the glowing red phone on the floorboard. I realized in a fraction of a second that I couldn't win the tug-of-war for the device before we plunged into the dense black tree line of the Capitol State Forest. If the software was completely hijacked, I had to kill the car's momentum the only way left: raw, destructive physics. I let go of the phone, threw myself back into the driver's seat, grabbed the steering wheel with both hands, and violently cranked it to the right, aiming the 2-ton vehicle straight for the steep, muddy embankment lining the exit ramp. We hit the wet earth and gravel at over 70 miles per hour. The sound of tearing metal, snapping pine branches, and shattering fiberglass was deafening. The undercarriage scraped violently against the rocks, the massive weight of the electric battery pack acting like a heavy anchor dragging through the mud. The brutal, instantaneous deceleration threw Arthur, who was still unbuckled and leaning over the seats, forward like a rag doll. He smashed hard against the back of my seat and crumpled down into the floorboard with a sickening thud. The catastrophic physical impact finally triggered the EV's analog safety failsafes. The high-voltage system automatically severed its connection to prevent a fire, instantly killing the engine and the hijacked computer. The airbags deployed from the steering wheel and side panels with a concussive bang, punching me in the chest and filling the dark cabin with thick, white chemical smoke. The car violently plowed through a thicket of blackberry bushes before finally grinding to a shuddering heavy halt, wedged deep into the muddy ditch. Total silence descended over the wreck, broken only by the hiss of the rain against the spiderweb-cracked windshield and the frantic ringing in my ears. I didn't wait for the smoke to clear. I kicked my door open, the crushed metal groaning in protest, and stumbled out into the freezing mud, gasping for the cold night air. I didn't look back into the backseat to see if Arthur was moving. I scrambled on my hands and knees up the slick embankment back to the asphalt of the interstate, waving my arms frantically, until a passing long-haul trucker slammed on his air brakes and called 911. When the state troopers and paramedics arrived, they pried the back door open and found Arthur unconscious on the floorboard, a severe concussion having knocked him entirely out of the digital world. He was immediately handcuffed to a stretcher and taken away. But the true horror of the night wasn't fully revealed until weeks later, when a detective from the cybercrimes unit called me to follow up on the investigation. Arthur wasn't a car thief, and he wasn't acting alone. The Crimson interface on his phone was a highly illegal dark web application, specifically engineered to exploit zero-day vulnerabilities in modern internet-connected vehicles. He was a digital hitman. The detective told me that when their tech team finally cracked the encrypted phone, they looked at his user history. My trip wasn't his first time using the app. His profile showed a long log of completed rides over the past 2 years, targeting rideshare drivers with high-end electric cars late at night. There were 12 completed trips in his history, and every single one of them ended at the exact same GPS coordinates, the deepest, darkest center of the Capitol State Forest Reservoir. I sold the electric car to a scrapyard the moment the insurance check cleared. Now I drive a 1998 beat-up sedan with manual locks, crank windows, and absolutely no screen on the dashboard. Because when I drive alone at night, I need to know that I am the only one holding the wheel.